Hey guys, Luke here again, and today's video is on inking trees. So I'm going to talk about and demonstrate my methods for inking some various types of trees and provide some tips to hopefully help you in your own work. So let's get started. So I'm going to start by penciling in a nice interesting tree here. With some cool roots sticking out. Nice gnarled looking trunk. I wanted to do something that's kind of in the foreground so that I can get in some textures, some leaves, branches, roots, bark, kind of cover all those various things. So I'm thinking just in terms of organic lines when I'm drawing a tree. Obviously, it should be informed from real trees and nature is always the best reference. So whenever possible, get out in nature, look at trees. If you can't do that, reference materials on the internet. So I'm using this is like a Hunt, I think it's a 107, I'm not sure though. It's one of the mapping nibs from Hunt. And I'm just going to dive in on the inking here. And this is going to be just sort of a sketchy style. I just wanted to do a basic tree sketch to give you a sense of how I approach it and highlight some of the tips I have for you. So keep your lines organic. I try to avoid straight lines. Of course, there's definitely cases where straight lines can be used, and rules are always made to be broken, as I say. So take everything with a grain of salt. Trees are great subjects to draw, though, even if you're just practicing your ink work, because they're all individuals. They're all very interesting. They're all shaped by the environment they're in, by the weather, lightning, wind, etc. And just very interesting, especially the older ones. The older they get, the more gnarled and twisted they are. It's very, very interesting to draw. So I've got these exposed roots kind of tangling down. Those are always fun to draw as well. And I'm going to ground the tree by putting some rocks around it as well, so it's not floating in space here. All right. Now, this right side is going to be the shadow side. And I'm going to start by just getting a nice thick line, nice shadow side going there. As well as this root back here. So just establishing that shadow. And this branch is kind of in the back, so I'm going to more or less just use single hatch lines to describe that one. I'm not going to go too much into detail on it. Okay. Now for the trunk, I'm going to do just a kind of a generic bark. Again, nature is the best reference. look at bark textures, every kind of tree has a different bark, and it's really interesting. This is sort of a combination of, I think, like a pine bark or an oak bark mixed. And I'm not trying to be extremely precise, and I'm not trying to be extremely faithful to any one particular tree. It's important to keep in mind that art, ink drawing, but generally art is it's all your impression. Even if you're looking at something and drawing from nature, it's still being filtered through your mind, your eyes, your mind, your hands. It's a mixture of how you see it and your abilities and just a whole bunch of factors. So it's not necessarily supposed to be a perfect representation of reality. It's your impression of reality. So kind of relax about that and focus on like putting the essence of what it is you want down, whether it's a tree or any other thing. Accuracy isn't always the best thing. So I'm going to introduce some curved hatching as well in this tree trunk to reinforce like the curved nature of the trunk. Mixing that in with the bark texture. So we're determining the shadows here, getting those lined nice and heavy. A lot of bark texture tends to soften a bit as it goes down into the roots. So not quite as heavy channels between the bark segments. So we'll transition from the bark texture I have up here to more lines, kind of curved lines, softens it a bit. Just want to take a second to ink this rock. A nice thing about using kind of always rounded organic lines in the tree is that when you go to ink, if you have rocks in the same scene and you then use straight lines for those rocks, it has a nice nice juxtaposition there between the curved organic lines of the tree and the straight, very geometric lines on the rocks. It's a nice way to separate those two elements. Sometimes it's nice to establish the surrounding terrain a little bit when you're inking a tree or anything else for that matter. Even if you're not ready to go full in on the surroundings, it's nice to put a bit of the terrain down just so that you have that sense of grounding that I mentioned. Just root back here, give that the lines as well, the curved lines. So the tree is starting to take shape. I've got an interesting knot right here. This is like where a branch fell out. Old dead branch. I'm going to put a little bit of bark texture in this side, but not as much. So I'm kind of utilizing the white space here to indicate the light direction coming in from the left. And that white space is also sort of highlighting the little bit of texture that I do put in here. And that's something I mention a lot in my videos as well, is the importance of white space. It has, in the same way that solid black has the effect of highlighting whatever it's around, white space also has that highlighting effect. And in ink, it's definitely one of the more powerful compositional tools that we have to work with. In fact, I'm planning on doing a video over on my Patreon soon that will kind of talk about the importance of negative space and how it can be utilized to the best advantage in ink art. So if you're interested in other videos, go check that out over on Patreon. It'll be up here in a couple weeks, but I have a lot of other content out as well, exclusively on Patreon. So the trunk is kind of done here. Just put a few more details in this root here. Another fun thing you can do with the roots is you can have them disappear into the ground and then kind of reappear for a distance over here. That's always fun to do. It has a cool effect, especially if you kind of, again, leave that white space around it. It looks pretty cool. Get some heavy blacks in amongst the rocks here. The surroundings have a big impact on the tree itself. They give it a lot of grounding, a lot of believability. So keep that in mind. You can introduce some plants like this. Doesn't take much. Okay, now moving up into the leaves. The leaves are a part that tends to get a lot of people caught up because of the details. Excuse me. So the trick with leaves is try to treat leaves in groups. So a mass of leaves rather than individuals. So I'm with this squiggly line that I'm drawing here, I'm kind of implying leaves without actually drawing the leaves themselves. And that's the trick. Because if you were to try to draw every single leaf, you would go nuts. It's definitely a trap that beginning artists, myself included, when I was starting out, I would fall into that all the time. And you just get bogged down in drawing the leaves, and it takes forever to do, and it looks cluttered. So try to, whatever leaf you're trying to draw, just try to draw them in clusters and use the edges of your clusters to kind of describe the type of leaf. Like every once in a while, you can pop out with an actual leaf shape like that. There you go. So that you're providing a little bit of detail, kind of teasing it, you're implying it, but you're not getting bogged down in drawing leaves for a day and a half. Now, once you've got those clusters established, now you can come in and do a few details like this. Either you can just keep making some squiggly lines like that, or you can do some hatching to create some areas of shadow. And you can kind of run those areas of hatching in different directions to imply different planes, because you've got this mass of leaves and they're all facing different directions. So keep that in mind. The shading and the lighting doesn't have to make sense because it's kind of a chaotic mass and the light is playing in all different directions in there. So you can kind of be free with that and not worry too much about specifics. So I'm going to draw some leaves here that are on the back side of the tree. And I'm just going to use these horizontal hatch lines to kind of give the impression of a little bit of distance. So taking some detail away. Remember, the more vague something is, the further away it appears. So when you're putting in your branches in the back of the tree like this, you can kind of fudge it a little bit. Just do the outline and then throw in some lines like that just to fill it in, and it gives the impression of just a little bit of distance. And let's do some more leaves over here as long as we're at it. So you sort of get the idea. Obviously, this would change a little bit if you're doing pine needles or different kinds of tree leaves are going to have little different outlines. But this is generally how I approach it. If your tree is in closer proximity, so it's extreme foreground, then you would handle this a little bit differently. You'd obviously have, first of all, you'd see less of the tree, but you would also have more detail. You might actually see more individual leaves. Depending on how close it is, you could still get away with implying leaves, and you'd just be detailing a few more leaves than you have here. So there you go. That's my general approach to inking trees. So there you have it. Those are my tips and techniques for rendering trees in ink. I hope that you found value in this video. Be sure to check out my other videos here. And if you're interested in exclusive videos, check out my Patreon, links in the box below. But thank you for watching to the end, and I appreciate all of your comments and your support here. And I will see you guys in the next video. Happy drawing.